Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Virtual Breakfast this morning. My name is Christine Charles. I'm a field crops and with an educator with a conservation focus based out of the Kellogg Biological Station on the west side, and we'll be getting started here. So now I'm going to hand it over to Jason Koning from Precision Planting to talk about preventing planter pitfalls this spring and planter maintenance. So we're very grateful that he's joining us this morning, and I'll hand it over.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jason Koning. I work for Precision Planting here in the state of Michigan. I see a lot of familiar names that I know here on the participants list. Phil had asked me if I could join you guys this morning and talk about just a few small things to set up your planters this year and some things that you should keep in mind when we're setting up the planter. I farm as well. I farm in St. Clair County, and for me as a farmer, it's always important to understand, especially with the planter pass, if I do or don't do a critical piece of planter maintenance or planter setup, what is that going to cost me? Is it going to cost me yield? Is it going to cost me just wear and tear on the machine? And so I always try to relate a lot of things back to agronomy. And so I'm going to walk you through just this first slide here of what I call some ear potential and some things that we could, some yield losses that we can have from spacing, singulation, or emergence errors if we don't do some things correct with planter maintenance, for example. So first of all, when we talk about spacing, if you are all in a 30-inch row and you're planting corn at, let's say, a 32,000 population, you should have a seed spacing down the row, plant by plant, of approximately every 6.5 inches. Purdue University back in the 90s, they studied the cost of spacing errors on our yield, and they found that for every two plants that we have in corn that are 4 inches or closer, we're going to have about a 10% loss of the ear. So we're going to lose some money because we have too much competition. We have two plants that are too close to each other. They're competing for the same resources, the same nutrients, the same water, the same sunlight. They saw that when we have two plants that are 2.5 inches or closer, on average, we're going to lose about 20% of the ear. So the losses start to accumulate as we start to get a little closer. Something we've also seen is we've also studied the effect on skips and doubles. So we'll nickname that term singulation. Singulation is something I'm going to tell you only occurs in the meter if I have an error. So if I have a gap down that row that I had a skip, or I have two plants right on top of each other, they're a double, that happened in the meter. So when we see a double on average, so we have two seeds that were stuck to the same hole of that meter disc and fell down that seed tube together, we're going to spend twice as much money on seed for that one ear that we were looking for. And we're still going to lose 40% of the ear because those seeds are so close to each other that they're going to be really fighting against each other for those resources. When we have a skip out of that meter, we don't drop a seed at all. We have an empty hole in that meter disc. On average, we're going to lose about 80% of that ear from a skip. We're not going to lose quite 100% because you have plants on either side that are going to flex a little bit and are going to fill in a little bit of that seed's gap. Now that's going to depend a little bit on the type of hybrid that you guys are growing. So some of the hybrids you're growing might be more of a flex type ear. Some might be more of a determinate sized ear. 80% is going to be what we believe to be the average. But the real losses are going to occur when we start to have emergence errors. So when I'm talking about emergence errors, I'm talking that I don't have plants that come up out of the ground at the exact same time as their neighbors. The goal when we're planting any crop, not just corn. I know that, this slide here, we're talking a lot about corn. Any crop that I plant, corn, soybeans, sugar beets, wheat, canola, dry edible beans, any crop in the world, we want to get every single plant to come up at the exact same time because when they come up at the exact same time, then we're all at the same level playing field. Plants that come up late are the runt of the litter. The runt is never going to catch up. So in corn specifically, if I have a plant that he comes up later than his neighbor and he's one leaf collar behind his neighbor, on average, we're going to see about a 50% loss of that ear. If I have a plant that comes up so late that he's two leaf collars behind his neighbor, on average, we're going to lose about the entire ear. Think about it a little bit. When you guys took that combine out this past fall into the field, did you have every single ear the exact same full size? Or did you have some ears that were a little smaller than others? We probably had a planter error up front that caused that yield loss all the way to harvest. So some things that we would need to keep in mind when it comes to planter setup and planter maintenance. The first thing that I talk about a lot is hitch height. This is not something that you're going to be able to do in the shop right now. The true best way to do this to make sure you have the correct hitch height is going to be in the field the first day that you can get the planter out and put it in the ground. And I'm going to recommend you do it with two people. Okay. When the hitch is too low, the 7x7 bar that our row units hang off of, that 7x7 bar is going to be pitched forward a little bit towards the tractor. Okay, I want to raise that hitch up so that 7x7 bar is running level as it's planting in the field. So the best way that I can recommend this is to have two people, one in the tractor, put the planter down in the ground, and go forward just like you're planting. That second person is going to be walking, running in the side by side next to the planter, eyeballing that 7x7 bar. Again, the 7x7 bar that the row units hang off of. We're going to be eyeballing that to see how level that bar is in the field. It has to be done in motion. Okay. So the cause of, I guess the problem with this, if I have my hitch height too low, number one, if I have no-till coulters on the planter, they're going to be going too deep. If I have no-till coulters on my planter, I never, ever, ever want the no-till coulters to be running below the depth of my opening discs. I don't want my no-till coulters to create a false seed bottom. Okay. Number two, if I have Keaton seed firmers, I'm not going to be getting quite as much pressure on them now. My closing wheels are probably not going to be getting as much pressure either. Again, we want to do this in motion, level those units while you're in the field. The other thing that I'm going to point out in this is think of your seed tube. If you picture your seed tube in your mind, the seed tube as it comes off the meter is kind of straight. And as it approaches the ground, it starts to curve a little bit. It's curved like that for a reason. It's physics. So you're planting forward at 4 to 5 miles an hour typically, and we're dropping seed down that tube. You never want that seed to touch the side of the tube. If that seed touches the side of the tube, it's going to bounce, and you're going to have a spacing error on the ground. So if that hitch is too low, and that 7x7 bar is pitched forward a little bit, you're going to pitch and change the direction that that seed tube is angled downwards. And so if we pitch that seed tube forward now, we're going to start to bounce a lot more seeds down that seed tube if I don't have that hitch height correct. Next thing that I think is really, really critical that we discuss is our opening discs. So we have a standard rule of thumb at Precision Planting that any opening disc that is half an inch of wear in its original diameter, a half an inch of wear now becomes scrap. So I don't sell opening discs, so I think I can get away with making that recommendation, because if you guys open up, let's say, your John Deere operator's manual for your planter, it's a 15-inch brand new disc, and it says in the book, you don't need to replace it until it's 14 inches. I think that is way too much wear, and I'm going to describe why. Most planters have a 15-inch brand new opening disc diameter, but you see there's some other planters such as Case IH planters that are 14 inches new. White 5000s are about 13 and a half inches new. White 9000s are about 15 and 3/4 inches new. But standard rule of thumb is once they get half an inch of wear, it becomes scrap metal. If you have a Deere, a Kinsey, or a White planter, you have a true V row unit. Your opening discs are supposed to have contact. They're supposed to touch each other. You do not want a W trench. You want a true V trench. And the best way to do that is to have those opening discs touching. So what I like to recommend is to take 2 business cards, right? You guys have a pile of business cards in the shop from guys like me that are in sales or whatnot, that they drop by a card and you probably never use it again. Grab 2 of those cards, take them out to your planner, stick one of the cards in from the top of your opening discs and slide it all the way down like you see here until that business card stops moving and just stays in place. And do the same thing from the bottom. So you're going to have a contact point there, a gap in between those business cards. You want to measure that gap. So if I have a 3 millimeter opening disc, I'm going to want approximately 2 to 2.5 inches of blade contact. My thicker opening discs, like a 3.5 millimeter, I'm going to want about 1.5 inches to 2 inches of contact. I'm going to strongly recommend that you spin those discs around and measure in 3 to 4 places. The reason for that is you're checking for warpage of the discs. Even on brand new discs, it's very, very common from different manufacturers that we will see warpage of the discs. So the discs are not true when you spin them around. And we also see from some manufacturers that the hub is not stamped right in the middle of that opening disc. I know a lot of customers that have measured this on their planner and taken most of their opening discs back to the OEM dealership because they did not get good quality blades. If you guys have a Case IH planner, you have a gap. You do not have a contact point. You should have a slight gap in between your opening discs. The reason why we want to make sure that we replace those opening discs when we get half an inch of wear instead of removing shims, because I've had several farmers ask me that. Well, Jason, why can't I just take shims out of my opening discs in order to bring them a little closer together once they get worn out so I can still have a contact point? Because when you start to remove shims, you bring those opening discs much closer to your seed tube and your seed tube guard. That seed tube guard does not just protect the seed tube. That seed tube guard helps hold your furrow open. If you have a worn out seed tube guard, when you put those opening discs into the ground, your soil is pushing back against the opening discs and it's going to flex the opening discs. So I've seen furrows that were so narrow that the seed was only getting about 1 inch deep because the seed was so wide it couldn't fit to the bottom of the furrow. So that seed tube guard is a critical piece of planter maintenance too, but we never want it to get so worn out that I can't get seed down to that 2-inch depth in the furrow. So when we replace the opening discs, we typically recommend that we replace the seed tube guard at the same time. Okay, I know I'm getting down to the end of my time. So the last thing that I really kind of wanted to touch on a little bit was the depth, the T-handles on the back of the row units. So if I go to your planner right now in the shop and I look at the back of the row units, we shouldn't have every single one of those T-handles at the exact same notch. If they are, you're making an assumption that the castings and all the wear components on your row units are equal and perfect. And that is never the case. Even on brand new planters, it's not the case. So what I recommend is that we do what we call the block test. So the block test, if I take each one of my T-handles and I put it at the same notch, Let's say I put it at the 2-inch notch. And then in the shop, this is something you can do right now. I'm going to lower the planter down onto 4x4 blocks. Or you can rig up some 4x4 blocks on a jack stand, and you can jack that row unit up. So you want the gauge wheel arm to be hitting against the stop like you're at full depth in the field. And so by doing that, you're going to be checking here to see what the variance is row to row in the depth at the exact same notch setting. So you're going to see here, like in this picture, that when you put that 4x4 block underneath there at the 2-inch depth notch, let's say, you should have a gap between the ground and the bottom of your opening discs. You want to measure the variance of that gap. Okay. One of the ways that I like to do it is I just take a stack of washers, slide the stack of washers underneath there for every single row. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get out a pad of paper, and I'm going to write down on my pad of paper, row number 1 at the 2-inch notch depth is a 1/4 inch above where it should be. Row number 2 at the 2-inch notch depth is perfect. Row number 3 at the 2-inch notch depth is a 1/4 inch below where it should be. And then when I go out to my planter during planting and I have to change the depth, I'm not going to see every single one of my row units at the same notch setting because I'm calibrating the depth by doing the block test here. So that's something that we've had a lot of customers over the last several years that have done this block test. And I've heard of guys that have done this on new planters and are commonly seeing about a 1/4 inch row to row variation. I know several people that have done this on older planters that they just replaced all of the depth components. They just replaced the gauge wheel arms. They just replaced that mustache on the John Deere row unit that the gauge wheel arm hits against. They just replaced their opening discs. And they still saw on those older row units with new depth components up to 3/4 of an inch row to row variation at the same notch. It's because the castings in that row unit and those depth components, those wear components, are going to change that in really small increments and are going to give you a different depth row to row. So that's all I had. I don't know if you guys have any questions for me. I'm going to be sticking around till the end here as well if we have more questions.
We'll start going through questions here. So first in the chat from Gordon, you mentioned the importance and need for the seed tubes to have a curvature that is needed to accommodate the travel speed of the planter. I assume then the actual curvature of the seed tube is meant to accommodate a certain range of travel speed. So too slow, we know, is not great, and too fast isn't great. What's the ideal travel speed for most seed tubes to work well? I know you answered this in the chat, but to summarize for folks just listening and not being able to see
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So you go back, I don't know how many decades, but seed tubes used to be straight. And at some point, I believe I was told that it was a John Deere engineer recognized that physics are at play here. And so they started to, put a curvature to those seed tubes. We've always taught that planting speed to match the curvature should be between 3.5 and 5 miles an hour. So, Gordon, yeah, you're correct that it's not just if I go too fast, am I going to have seeds that start to bounce down the tube? But yeah, potentially going too slow is going to negatively affect spacing as well. It's important to understand that when I have a seed that bounces down that seed tube, it's going to cause a spacing error. It only takes 1/100th of a second that seed is going to be in that seed tube for an extra just 1/100th of a second to result in a 1-inch spacing deviation on the ground. So it does not take long before you have spacing errors. But I think it is important to understand though. I mean, many of you in this chat either have a high-speed planter or have heard about high-speed planters. We sell one of those versions called Speed Tube. I know John Deere has an Exacta Merge. Those seeds are directly grabbed right off of the meter and they're pushed through the seed tube all the way to the ground. So it's a controlled, it's not even a drop. It's a controlled, transport from the meter to the ground. And so high speed planters allow planting speed to increase over 5 miles an hour because you're not bouncing down that seed tube. There's no bounce anymore.
No, that's a great thing to consider, especially with those newer high-speed planters. So in your presentation, you talked a bit about that depth test, which I think is some great homework for folks today in the shop while it's still wet. Um, and talked about how even when you've replaced all those new and gotten new depth components, you can still be seeing uneven depth across your row bars. Now, is that something to be concerned about, or what's the best way to address that or go about addressing that depth issue as you do the depth test?
Yeah, definitely something to be concerned about. I mean, when we're out planting any crop, I think one of our primary things that we're trying to focus on is ensuring that every seed on every single row gets placed within the moisture line or below the moisture line. If I don't have moisture, seed's not going to germinate. It's just as simple as that. On average, seed corn is going to need to absorb 30% of its body weight in order to trigger germination. Soybeans need to absorb about 40% of their body weight before they trigger germination. So at the beginning, like when I started to talk through uniform emergence, uniform emergence starts with uniform germination. And uniform germination is a result of every single seed having the exact same amount of moisture that they can soak up, the exact same temperature, and the same oxygen level. So you're kind of managing a micro environment with every single row and every seed down every single one of those rows. And so, yeah, if I start to see that depth variation in the shop row to row, even with brand new or some, components that have some wear to them, I still want to get every single row to have the same true depth in the field. So that's why, for example, one of the things I like to do is on my planter, I have those standard T handles. I'm going to write down on a pad of paper, what the true depth is at each notch. And so then I'm going to have each one of those T handles at different settings through the field to try to get to the same exact depth.
Right. Yeah.
Jason,
Question. Oh,
I'm sorry, Christine. I had a question for Jason. Jason, do you have any links that you want to share with these people that are participating today? I know you talked about it. I'd be glad to put them into the chat if you do.
Yeah. So, uh, Phil, I shared with you earlier two links. So if you guys prefer to read through some stuff and see some pictures, we have a planter maintenance guide that you can look through that you can download. We also have a video series. So if you guys like watching videos instead, we have a video series that goes through planter maintenance. So, I mean, I only touched on what, like two, three things. I think three things that I went through on planter maintenance in 15 minutes. I didn't want to cover 20 different things and leave no detail. So both those things are going to give a lot more detail to every aspect of planter maintenance and planter setup for the spring.
great. Thank you for sharing that. So, question from David. He wants to know your thoughts on spacing differences with soy and dry beans, if there are yield differences with that. They're not nearly as touchy as corn, I'm sure, but what's the data say? And, soys and dry beans using more of those fluted meter drills, planted with the fluted meter drills is what he's talking about.
Yeah, good question. So I would say the answer depends. It depends a lot on what my population is for soybeans and dry beans. So there's a lot more research out there, obviously, with soybeans and dry beans right now, simply because of the acres of soybeans that are grown compared to dry beans in the U.S. But what we see is if you're going out with a planting population of, let's say, 200,000 with soybeans, spacing performance really doesn't matter a whole lot. Emergence doesn't matter a whole lot because you just have so many seeds out there that any error that you're going to have is going to be masked because you have such a high population. If you guys start to, go onto the internet and you start to research, these high yielding soybeans, like we got guys in Georgia that are pushing 200 some bushel soybeans. Their soybean populations are not 200,000. They're like 60 to 80,000. They're dropping populations like crazy. And when they drop those populations, all of these singulation, spacing, emergence details matter significantly. So yeah, they're spending less money on seed, but when they're trying to get those high yielding soybeans are going to be able to branch out, and they're trying to get that branching out. They're trying to build that base in the soybeans. You can't build a base in soybeans if you have seeds every quarter inch away from each other. So yeah, I mean, like I said, if you're looking to drop soybean populations, singulation, spacing, emergence matters a lot more. If you're going out with 200 plus thousand seeds, I mean, if you're using a drill's a controlled spill. That controlled spill, you don't really have any control over spacing quality. But obviously with the drill, you can also get much narrower rows. And the later planting that we have, as we get later into May, we get into June planting, narrower spacing is going to really start to win out because we're going to get that canopy closed quicker.
Yeah. So talking about singulation being one of those key points with getting your crop started off right, what's top things that we could be doing in the shop to ensure quality singulation before we get to the field? And then there are a lot of new technologies to help improve singulation, especially. So what are things that people can be working on their own planters? And then what are some products or technologies that you're starting to see that you're excited about to improve
Yeah.
singulation?
Yeah, that's a good question. When it comes to singulation, I mean, it's important to understand what meter you have and what its capabilities even are. So, for example, if I look at a finger meter wants a specific size seed. So, if you're planting corn, it wants a specific size seed, like a medium flat, let's say, and it wants a very consistent size seed. So, when you ordered your seed from your seed dealer back in January, December, October, whenever you did it, those finger meters need to have a specific size seed when you order it. That's important. And when it comes to maintenance of the meters, finger meters are going to require a lot more maintenance than a vac meter because they have a lot more moving parts. So, I know Phil was very, Phil made sure to tell me that, hey, we don't want this to be a sales pitch. And I don't want this to be a sales pitch, but dealers that I work with throughout the state of Michigan, they all have a Meter Max Ultra test stand, and they run those meters on the test stand as a service for customers. So they'll put 1,000 seeds through every meter, and the test stand will measure every skip and every double that meter has in that 1,000 seed run. It's going to record it. The dealer's then going to pull the meter apart, replace any components that are wore in that meter, and then put another 1,000 seeds through the meter and show the improved performance. So that's always a good idea that I'm going to recommend, to have those meters running well. But meter maintenance doesn't start right before planting like now. Meter maintenance starts the day that you finish planting. When you take all of the seed out of your meters, if you leave that seed in the meter, we've seen a lot of times that mice get up inside the meters. They chew through a seal, they chew through a brush. I've seen mice that have chewed a hole through a plastic vacuum disc to get to seed. We'll recommend taking all the seed out. We'll recommend on a vacuum planter, you take the disc out so it doesn't press up against the seal. If you have a finger meter that has an adjustable brush, we'll recommend that you adjust that so that the finger is not resting against the brush over the next 10, 11 months. So yeah, there's several things from a meter perspective that we got to do. I mean, that meter is the heartbeat of the planter. So taking care of that meter, not just a month before planting, but the day after planting, I think is critical too.
And what a great reminder. Okay, so David asks, what are some planter tips and prep for grain drills, and how are those different than row planters?
Grain drills, good question. I'm not gonna say that I am a knowledgeable expert right now when it comes to seeders and drills. That's just maybe a personal thing that I haven't spent as much time. But Dave, I am going to put a link in here in the chat that we do have a seeder maintenance guide that you can go through on that. The biggest thing that I've seen that we can do to improve our stand with a seeder specifically is the closing system. Closing systems, I think, on seeders are probably the biggest thing that they lack in closing that furrow correctly.
Thanks for that other resource. And Eric, our soybean expert in the state with Extension, highlighted ideal seeding rates. So both small plot and on-farm research results across the Midwest over time point out to economic optimum soybean populations of 100 to 120,000, with many studies showing similar yields with as low as 80,000, including results here in Michigan. So to your earlier point, Jason, not necessarily going straight for the larger seeding rates and that 100 to 120 and even lower being ideal, making sure that our planter is ready to address those intricacies to improve planting. So we only went through those three parts, right? And there are so many other aspects to check through as you're prepping planting. What are some other key areas that one you're seeing a lot of issues with in terms of repairs, right? Where are folks forgetting to look maintenance wise? And then what's going to make the biggest difference to improve those singulation, even emergence, and spacing issues?
Right now, I think one of the biggest things that I see get overlooked is maintenance on the parallel arms of the planter row unit. So that parallel linkage, if you guys pick up the back of the row unit in the shop while it's hanging up in the air on the planter, you don't want that row unit to pivot a little bit. If you pick up the back of the row unit and it pivots a little bit, it's pivoting on those parallel arms up front. And so most of these parallel arms direct from the OEM manufacturer, the parallel arm itself is weaker than the bushing, meaning that if it's weaker than the bushing, the parallel arm wears out faster than the bushing does. The parallel arms cost more money to replace. So that's one of the biggest things that I see that gets overlooked, because it's not just a matter of changing out that bushing. We a lot of times need to replace the bolt, the bushing, and unfortunately those parallel arms. There's a couple different options to replace those. I know there's a few aftermarket kits that you can remount the hole in that parallel arm and put a double bushing in, which is a great option if you have a lot of time and patience to remount those parallel arm holes. We sell, as well as there's a few other companies that sell an upgraded kit right from the beginning that has a double bushing. So in time, instead of replacing the whole parallel arm, you're just replacing a set of bushings. And repeat your second question if you could. I'm sorry, Christine.
Oh, no, you're good. And then what else is going to make a biggest difference with improving emergence, singulation, and
Mm,
spacing? So we talked about the biggest thing to overlook and the biggest thing, the other things that are going to make a difference.
yeah. The two biggest things towards improving, my planter stand overall is number one, maintenance, and number two, it's how the operator runs the planter, to be honest. I make a living by selling technology. Technology costs money. If me as the operator, if I haven't done planter maintenance, none of the technology is really going to make that much of an impact. If as the operator, if I'm not managing the planter, if I'm just driving and I'm not checking to see if there's things that are going on and problems that I need to resolve while I'm planting, I'm really setting myself behind. So besides utilizing a monitor that can show us some sensor data to help us manage the planter, the biggest thing I see is to get out of the cab and dig. And it's really cliche because everyone says that, right? Everyone says, we got to get out of the planter and dig. I think at the beginning of the season, I think there's a lot of us that get out and dig at the beginning. And towards the end of the season, we just want to be done and we don't get out of the cab very much. But when I say get out and dig, the biggest thing that I see is if we're checking how to create a furrow. So when I'm creating a furrow, I want to get out of the cab with the planter still in the ground and stopped. And I'm going to look at that gap between the opening discs and your closing wheels. So between the opening disc and closing wheels, the furrow should be open. And I should be able to see seed in the bottom of the furrow. If I can't see seed in the bottom of the furrow and the furrow has collapsed, I put dry soil from the soil surface into the bottom of my seed furrow. So I put dry soil down where I want moisture. So if I see that, I either need to probably increase the amount of downforce that I have. I need to check planter maintenance to see if I'm letting some dry soil get between my gauge wheels and opening discs. Or I need to tell the guy that's running the disc, and he's 2-3 days ahead of me, I need to tell him that he needs to go and take a day or two off because he's drying the soil out too much. So getting out of the cab, checking how we're creating a furrow, and digging behind the planter, those things will never, ever go away with technology, ever.
And Phil, that's a great reminder. Thank you, Jason. You have an update for us?
Yeah, I had a message from Dave Wachowski who was driving, and so he really can't participate on the go. But he wanted me to make sure and or say that so far there's between 500 and 1,000 acres of sugar beets that are already planted this spring. So farms are underway, and there was some drier weather. I'll say drier, not dry weather, a little bit earlier. So I think spring has sprung, and it's just a matter of wait and see now at this point. So that's what I had to say.
Great. Thank you for that update from David. And then their last question is going to be from another David. Put in our chat. So talking about the angle of dual closing wheels for the planter and grain drill. So what's your recommendation on where to set that angle, how to set angles? What would make you change angles of those closing wheels?
Yeah, good question. I don't know if I necessarily have a recommendation on the angle of the closing wheel itself, other than maybe the width. So, I mean, if you guys, go down to the Louisville Farm Show and you want to change the closing system on your planter, you might see 40 or 50 different kinds of closing wheels at the Louisville Farm Show that someone's trying to sell you, me included. So, trying to understand which one do I want, which closing wheel do I want, that's something that I can change every single row in that closing system and dig behind the planter to evaluate performance. So with any closing system, the way that you know that your closing system is doing a great job is if you dig behind the planter to try to find the seed. And if you're digging and you can't feel kind of the outline of that furrow, that probably means you're doing a good job closing it. The closing system is supposed to completely obliterate the seed furrow. So if you can feel the outline of that furrow, there might need to be some changes you need to make to the width of that closing system to make it a little wider, a little narrower, or it may just mean that we need more pressure. It may mean that we need to try a different closing system altogether. All these different closing wheels that are sold today, their manufacturer is going to have a recommendation of how wide to set the wheel. So when I'm talking the width, I'm talking they're measuring the width at the very bottom of that closing wheel in the center. So every one of those has a different recommendation. I am going to recommend that most closing systems, we can either have those wheels, directly apart from each other or slightly staggered. I have yet to see a situation yet that slightly staggered was not my preference. I prefer to stagger for a couple of reasons. Number one, because I think it allows a little better flowability of residue and rocks, and because I think it can do a better job closing that furrow.
Great. And thanks for kind of walking through that. It's hard to say that sometimes it's going to depend, right? That's
Yeah.
the main answer. And
Yeah.
so,
I mean, I'm not an agronomist, but if you guys talk to any agronomist and you ask an agronomist a question, half the time they're going to say, well, it depends.
right.
And with soil conditions in the field at planting, a lot of times it does depend.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Jason. We'll have your information in the chat, or people can look through the chat for those maintenance guides for follow-up questions if you have any. And I'll let you go here. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for joining us.